Welcome to the Power Exit Podcast. This show is dedicated to business owners who want to scale up, plan smarter, and prepare for the ultimate exit. We'll talk with M&A experts and owners who've been through the process to provide actionable advice so that you can sell your business on your terms and without regret. I'm John Marsh. Join me as we prepare to take control of your exit. All right, welcome to the next episode of the Power Exit Podcast. I'm thrilled to have a friend here and a great M&A attorney in Atlanta named Nida Rizvi. Nida and I have worked on several transactions together, and she's one of my favorites. So, Nida, please say hello, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, and excited to have a good conversation here with you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, John, for having me. I am Nida Rizvi. I have been at Burr Forman for a couple years now here in Atlanta. I am an M&A attorney. I also do general corporate work. I've been practicing for, over 15 years now. I started out my career in New York and in London, and I'm primarily focused on middle market.
Great. Well, we're going to have a conversation about, the legal side, but also about the emotions and kind of what we've seen. We've worked on, like I said, several deals. Luckily, we're still friends because some of those deals are a little juicy at times. But so you've seen things from both your seat now as Burr and Forman, but you've also been in-house. What has surprised you the most about how buyers and sellers actually behave once a deal starts to get real?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, you know, it's interesting how buyers and sellers will switch from, once the LOI is signed and the valuation is confirmed and, we've kind of gotten through all the negotiation pieces of it, how quickly it can become quite emotional for sellers particularly. I see my job as being part therapist, part business advisor, part, the technical legal side is often not where the issues come up. It's really managing expectations and, bringing the seller into like, here's the reality of how deals work. This is our bread and butter. We do a lot of founder family owned businesses. I do both buy and sell side. And so having been on, opposite ends sometimes, it's interesting to see how quickly, trust can be either be like a real benefit, which it always is, or it can be kind of chipped away at little by little. And so, for a lot of our sellers, this is their life's work and it's incredibly emotional for them. And sometimes they are very ready to move on. And sometimes they feel like it's the right thing to do, but emotionally they're not there yet. So there is sometimes that resistance that we need to help them through.
Yeah. Yeah. And it happens almost in every deal. Folks often think that an LOI is signed and the quote unquote deal is done, but that's when the real work starts, the diligence, the legal aspect, including our clients' favorites, the disclosure schedules, pulling that information together. So it does get real and it gets kind of hairy. We've had clients on a deal kind of go dark on us for several days while they, made sure that they were ready to do this. We've had others walk away, right? And that's
Just once.
just once. And he had his reasons, although, anyway. So tell me a little bit about what business owners often think their attorney should handle in the sale process, but reality the legal team can't fix at that stage. A good example might be something that's not in an LOI or is in an LOI. But do you ever get asked to fix things that really aren't your specialty or aren't in your lane?
I would say anything that's related to like their accounting methodology or their financials, like at that point, it's too late, right? Or if there are like tax issues that they have, I mean, we can help to mitigate that risk. We can help to kind of help resolve, payments and things like that if there's a tax lien, but we can't unwind it. We can't take it away. And hopefully at that point, a seller has already surfaced kind of major issues to a buyer prior to signing an LOI. It's never a good idea to bring that up after the fact. And that goes back to the trust conversation, that you and I have a lot about being upfront. And so that helps to, later on, if there are issues that come up, and they always do, to say like, hey, look, we showed a lot of goodwill, pre-LOI, and during that whole process, you did your pre-LOI diligence. Um, let's work through this, because often when deals go sideways, it's not a legal issue that is the cause of it. Um, and sometimes it's the lawyers, but it's not a legal issue or technical issue. It's oftentimes a misunderstanding or miscommunication or a lack of education, and understanding on a seller's part, or maybe even a buyer's part.
Right. Well, and buyers act differently. There are some buyers who really come in with a sledgehammer and really want to get everything their way. That's something that's telling oftentimes. And if you're
You
just
suss
going,
that out pretty quickly.
yeah, right. We hopefully have run a process on our side where that those management calls and the way they act through the LOI process or pre-LOI is telling, and we don't want to get into a situation where that rears its ugly head. But oftentimes, and we've been on a couple of calls together where the attorneys on the other side really kind of talk down to us, and
Yep.
uh, fine, that's okay if that's the way the New York folks want to handle it. Chicago too, by the way.
Yeah.
It's but it is telling. So you touched on something. Deals fall apart late in the process. It usually is not a legal issue, but something deeper in the seller's mindset or in their preparation. I read an article just this morning about how a sell side quality of earnings should be non-negotiable. You should have it done regardless.
Yeah,
And
we're seeing more and more of that.
are you seeing more and more?
We are.
Even on the what size deals do you think, the minimum size that you've seen a sell side on?
I'd say like 5 million. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a lot of competition even in smaller deals, even with RWI, and we can get to that later. But the market is getting compressed, and so you're seeing smaller and smaller deals, kind of act more like mid market, lower market.
Yeah. When you touched on something that, generally when you don't do a sell side quality of earnings, the LOI is going to have some vague language around working capital. Working capital can be a big retrade, especially if we're going in blind. We don't have a CPA looking at it, or the financials aren't gap. We're really beholden to the buyer at that stage. So controlling your destiny is important. Um, from your perspective, what are the early signals that a seller is going to be easy to work with versus difficult during due diligence? How do you tell? And we're here to help all kinds of people, right? I think you're like me in that we have a no able policy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but what are the kind of the red flags that you see when a client maybe may be difficult during diligence?
Um, this reminds me of, we had a client you and I shared, and you referred her to me for, and I'm obviously not going to name any names, or no, I mean, we ended up doing the deal, right? And it was a difficult one to get through, and this goes back to the seller being resistant. I think it was part of some personal matter that she was kind of forced to do it. And she didn't want to, but I think you referred her to me, and I think she for whatever reason said that you and I were in cahoots, right? So, and I think it's so important to hire advisors who you can trust, obviously, but also you have to go in believing that they have your best interest at heart. And so you and I had no reason to be in cahoots, right? Against our own client. But I think, you know, going back to the question, kind of an easy client is someone who is hiring you for the right reasons, right? And they trust that you're going to do right by them and take care of them. Um, and then also someone who is prepared, right? They're organized, they've got their ducks in a row. They're not going to go dark on you. They're really engaged, and they want to be doing this. And they have an end goal. Like whenever I start an engagement, I always want to know, like, why are you doing this? What's the goal at the end? And that's what we, keep your eye on the prize kind of thing. Are you doing it just because you want to retire? Are you doing it because you want to play more golf? Are whatever the reason is, we always keep that in mind. Um, and an easy seller or an easy client is going to be one that, you know, is going to listen to your advice and be open and flexible, um, and just take on your recommendations. At the end of the day, I can't force anyone to do anything, right? We're here to advise and to tell you based on what we've seen, based on the market, based on best practices, because we do this day in, day out. Here is the deal that we can get for you. And here's where the market is. And then they get to decide, right? They get to make the choice, and we can only advise and give recommendations. So yeah, those are the best kinds of sellers. The best kinds of clients are the ones that are engaged and flexible and are going to take your advice seriously and on board.
Well, and I tell my clients that your business would be in trouble if you hired me to come run it. I don't know how to run
Right.
the clients' businesses. I also don't know how to paper an agreement, an APA or an SPA. That's why it takes an attorney. So it's bringing those team members together and working collaboratively. I have a client now who has a team of advisors. He's got some other M&A folks who are at his golf course, and we're working as a team. I'm the one he's hired, but he's got these retired gentlemen who are very capable, and we're collaborating on the best strategy for him. I think that gives him some trust that he's got multiple voices. We encourage that, right? I mean, just like you and me, when we want to be on the calls together, we want to brainstorm and figure out a solution that works for our client, but we're also going to tell them when it's time to walk, when it's not a good deal anymore.
Right.
That's in our professional ethics. It's not about getting a deal done just for the sake of getting it done.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really important to have that. I call them the board of advisors like you. I've worked with you, on many, many deals, and you go above and beyond. I think I've worked with a lot of brokers, and some brokers, they're not all created equal, just like lawyers. And some will sign the LOI and say, my job's done. I'll see you at the closing. Here's my wire info. And then there's others like you who will really stay engaged throughout the whole process and actually save the client money because you'll help out in the, due diligence. You'll help out with the disclosure schedules. You're on all the calls. And so I think, if we've got a broker who is, taking on a lot of that work, you're going to spend less on legal fees. So actually it's super helpful sometimes to have, an accountant, a private wealth advisor, a broker, an M&A attorney, and not just any attorney, an actual M&A attorney, depending on the business and on the size, but you want someone who has the experience for what you're about to go through.
Yeah. And, oftentimes you talked about trust. Oftentimes clients have an attorney who they've worked with for many years, but that attorney may not have M&A experience.
Mhm.
How do you feel about that person being involved in the process?
I have no issue with that person being involved or kind of looking over the agreements and one thing we have to be careful about is obviously privilege. Um, but yeah, I have no problem with someone having input if that person is trusted and our client wants that person on. It's different to have that person represent the other side and have like a litigator on the other side when M&A is not what they do. That makes it really, really difficult. Litigators have a very different mindset than, and it becomes super adversarial and it doesn't need to be. That's why I didn't go into litigation. I prefer transactional work because everyone is supposed to be working on the same goal, right? Someone wants to sell, someone wants to buy. And litigators, just, my experience has been, it's been a more difficult transaction when you have a non M&A attorney on the other side.
Well, and I also love one of the deals that you and I did together was a union company, a union contractor. And it was beautiful because you had that expertise in house. That might not be your particular area of expertise, but to just walk down the hall or down the floor and bring that on is important. And I think that's important too, when you're evaluating the right attorney, looking at the complexity of the deal and making sure that not only that attorney but the firm has the expertise. And that's one of the things I like about Burr.
Yeah, I kind of sell the firm as a whole, right? Because under the umbrella of Burr, you've got every specialty. We're full service. So if it's, an ERISA matter, labor and employment, unions, like you said, federal contracts, IP, commercial real estate, like we do it all. And while you know this, we run a very lean team, like a very lean core team on the corporate side. We can pull in, other expertise as needed.
Yeah, good. So I want to talk a little bit about what sellers do who are prepared before the lawyers get involved. Oftentimes I hear from clients, oh, it's not time for an attorney. It's not time for an attorney. And, the earlier the better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But at a minimum, they must be involved at the LOI stage. What do you see from those who do it right? If you had a billboard that said, hey, this is when we should get involved,
Yeah.
who would that say, when would that be?
Like you said, the earlier the better. Definitely pre-LOI, because that's really when I think a lot of sellers don't realize this, but that's really when you have quite a bit of leverage. Um, and especially if you want to spend less money on lawyers, you can work in, caps, baskets, indemnity items into that, really figure out your working capital. I have a senior partner here who you've worked with as well. And he often says more money is won and lost in the working capital it is, right? So getting that right and getting that number and that target right is really, really important.
So, Netta, if you could force every seller to do one, two, three things before they go to market, what would they be?
So three things that I think sellers could do to really, really prepare for an exit is clean up their financials, make sure those are solid. Buyers can be really forgiving, but they can't forgive numbers. So, we can work through a lot of other things, but if it turns out that the numbers aren't correct, um, that can really kind of break trust in a lot of ways, because that's really what the buyers are basing their valuation on. Um, and then second is to get, your corporate documents in order, your material contracts in order. You'd be surprised at how many, sellers don't have fully executed versions of their agreements, or their a copy of their agreements at all. And those are always something, especially if it's a contract heavy business, that's something that buyers are going to want to see as a priority. Um, and then, the third is just, building a sort of compelling growth story, right? And that's what your broker, your other advisors can help do. But I think your financials and what is your accounting methodology? Are you cash basis? Are you accrual basis? Are you GAAP compliant? And making sure that the structure that you want is going to work. So I'd say get your accountant involved early, but also your lawyer. And those really, they work in tandem, right?
Yeah, I
They'll
love
get
those.
you the best deal.
It gets down to preparation. Be thinking about
Yeah.
those well in advance. I mean, I don't think this was a deal we worked on together, but I had a client who it was a stock purchase. It was an S corporation, but we could not find the S election that was filed with the IRS
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago. And he spent hours and hours and hours on the phone with the IRS on hold. Finally, he got a copy of it, but the buyer wasn't going to close over it. They needed to move forward, and it's a simple one pager from the IRS.
That's right.
So save your documents, get organized. Um, that's it.
Yeah, especially if you're an S corp, because those documents are difficult to get if you don't have the original. I mean, yeah, and that's just time wasted, right? Um, during a process. If you can get all that, yeah, have a minute book. I know it's just a simple thing, but those binders are typically the first thing they ask for in diligence, right? And that kind of sets the tone as well for your deal. Like a buyer wants to get comfort that you have been doing things the right way, and they can forgive a missing document here or there, but when it's something that basic, it's kind of like the broken windows theory.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about fees. I'm not gonna put you on the
Favorite
spot
topic.
and tell you how much, but it is, a lot of clients are fee sensitive.
Yeah,
The majority of my fee is success fee based, so it comes out of the proceeds at closing. Attorneys, other advisors don't work that way.
that's
Uh,
right.
So what can a client do? Not that we want. I mean, everybody needs to get paid for their time, but what drives fees up? I'd imagine the organization issue that you talked about, folks not being organized. But what else do you see that really drives fees up that is almost avoidable or something someone could do in advance of a transaction so that they're not overspending?
Yeah. Um, so I think I'm probably one of the few attorneys who feels this way, but one of my goals when I'm engaged is to make sure that the seller gets to keep as much of their money that the right in their pocket. Like that's why they're doing this. So yeah, certainly we want to be paid, a fair fee, but anything that we can do to help them prepare to keep those fees on the lower end is fine by us. And I think a lot of what you do, like I said earlier, is helpful in that way, right? They lean on their advisors who are maybe, commission based or success fee based, and are not on the clock hourly like we are, to help them through it, right? And to maybe let someone in the business in on what they're doing. Because I think part of the frustration is not only are they going through this process, which is incredibly arduous and difficult and time consuming, but also it's keeping this big secret because not, people in the company don't know. Um, and not having the resources, right, to fully throw it at a process like this. So um, I think something that, they can do to keep fees down is definitely, like I said, organization, um, and having someone help, like you. And then, getting in early on sort of the diligence items. Like the best thing you can do is prepare as if diligence on a deal starts tomorrow, right? And then sometimes you can't control it, right? And we can't control it. We can help to mitigate things, but if you've got a really difficult, opposing counsel, um, or you've got an unexpected tax issue that comes up, or an unexpected lien that's on the business, like some of those things are just unavoidable. But knowing your business really, really well, um, and cleaning up financials, debt, as much as you can, will really help to make the disclosure schedules easier. Um, and because that's where a lot of lawyers spend time, I would say, on the disclosure schedules and on reviewing contracts and diligence and the back and forth that is involved in that. And then on your typical kind of indemnity, warranty kind of issues. But, um, if we can negotiate the fundamental reps and warranties or baskets and caps for the indemnities up front. And that's why I say get a lawyer involved pre-signing the LOI. Then that saves you, a lot of money. It could save you thousands of dollars because those items are heavily negotiated.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of what we do is education, right? We're educating folks, like you said, on indemnification, the concept between, a basket or a cap, a tipping basket, a deductible basket. The other thing a lot of time on is working capital and just the mechanism for that, right? Um, from a legal perspective, what do you see that you have to spend time educating on?
I would say for us, it's really on where the market is, for things like indemnities. But um, yeah, I've got a seller right now. He's incredibly sweet. He's selling, a family business. His son works in it too. Um, and he just, I- I'm trying to explain working capital to him and the indemnities, and baskets and caps and de minimis amounts and deductible and tipping and all the things you mentioned. And he really was struggling with it. So, trying to figure out how do you put this in layman's terms. And, I'm a visual learner, so maybe I need to come up with a chart or an example or something for him. But yeah, I would say education, the education part is key. There's a lot that's lost on the indemnity part. I would say that's probably the number one.
Yeah, good. Thank you. We've got a couple more minutes here. I want to shift our gears over to, what behaviors from a buyer tends to create the most friction in a deal.
Yeah. I would definitely say, an aggressive buyer, and that I haven't seen a big shift in a lot of our clients, but sometimes you can see where, they really push, and they'll keep going back to the LOI. and say, well, this isn't what we agreed to, and then there'll come a point where they want to retrade something. And then we'll say, well, this isn't what the LOI said. Well, they're, oh, well, it's non-binding, right? So kind of that like push and pull, being aggressive. And then they have aggressive lawyers as well. Um, and that can sometimes be concerning because if they're treating you that way now and they haven't even bought your business, it's concerning about how and whether or not you stay on in the business, how they'll treat you, but more importantly, how they'll treat your employees, right? And the people that you're leaving behind, the people that you've worked with for many, many years and you want to take care of. And you want to make sure that it's left in good hands, right? And so I would say a buyer who is being unreasonable, and like I said, we don't get a lot of that, but there's been a couple of instances where we've just said, you look, we need to push back. And sometimes they think that, because we're not big New York lawyers, that they can get away with it, but that never works in their favor.
Right. That's right. Are there certain tactics that good advisors immediately recognize, but an owner might miss?
I would say in working capital, sometimes, a buyer may use kind of lack of understanding or something like that, to kind of, use that in their favor. But this is why it's so important to have really good advisors like you and M&A lawyers, right? And then have your accountants on board as well. If you don't have an accountant, what are you doing? But really to get all of those people involved early enough so that they can pick up on those things. Because I think a buyer thinks that you're unsophisticated. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean that kind of, you've never done this before and they do it all the time, especially if it's a PE type of buyer. Um, there may be some of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we're quick to correct it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's not going to last very long here. Um, as we wrap up here, what's the most unusual issue you've seen come up during due diligence that almost killed a deal?
Unusual. I would say, I don't know that this was unusual, but I think, and we were on this deal together. One that surprised me the most, I guess, was it was a $20 million deal, and the night before closing, the parties walked away over $120,000 insurance premium.
Yeah.
Shoot, do you remember this?
I do. Oh, yeah. I remember.
Oh yeah. So yeah, and the night before, and I think that came after like a series of trust issues, right? And the seller had just had enough, and we represented the seller, obviously. And they had just had it, and the buyer wanted that windfall, and we just said that was wrong, and they weren't going to get it, and
Yeah.
I think both sides thought that the other party will come back to the table, but they did.
And that one hurt. That was because we were, like you said, it was the night before closing. But I did not think that was right, what the buyer was doing. And we advised.
Yeah, I completely understood the seller's position. It was unfortunate, you had done a ton of work on it and you didn't get your fee. We took a heavy discount on ours, and obviously we had an unhappy seller, right? And that's the worst part of it. It's not fees, it's not that, all the other stuff. It was that we had a really unhappy and unsatisfied client. And for that, that's the worst part of it, I think. Um, and I think they've gone on to sell their business and it worked out for them eventually, but that was, I would say, it was unfortunate that we couldn't get over that issue. And like I said, it was not a technical legal issue, and it wasn't something that the lawyers had done. It was just a mismatch on, what the buyers were being unreasonable about, and the sellers had just had enough.
And they threw it in at the last minute, like we weren't going to get it. Didn't tell us about it. It was.
Yeah, so those kind of like sneaky things after there had been, a couple of concessions already made on other items, to get the deal done, and the sellers, I was proud of them. They put their foot down and they said, like enough's enough. We're not doing this anymore. We're not playing your game. But yeah, you do get some buyers like that.
Yeah, and that was a shame for sure. But I'll tell you that buyer's probably not doing a whole lot of deals right now because you don't win a lot working.
Yeah, I feel like that stuff works itself out, right? That's not a buyer you would want to on your business.
Well, Nida, I really appreciate you being here on the podcast today. I think your insights are very valuable, and I'm lucky to consider you a friend. We need to do another double date with the spouses and go get some sushi or something like
Yeah,
that. But
I would love that.
if anyone in the audience wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on the Burr Forman website, or you can email me at nrizvi@burr.com.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thanks
for
so much
having
for
me.
being here, Netta. Yeah, talk soon.